were on a domestic flight with the Auckland woman infected with coronavirus. The softball officials then went on to officiate a tournament in Whenuapai this week involving police and the military. I'm sure Checkpoint will keep you updated on the latest regarding developments around coronavirus. 5 to 5, the panel, RNZ National. Now, the idea of a phone-free day was born from a father out with his two sons. Tino Benz was with his two sons at Kelly Tarleton's Aquarium in December and was dismayed to see parents more focused on their devices than their children. Tino said, "Look, I'm no saint. I've been that parent, but as a technology sector worker, he wants to help make a difference and help people put down their phones." So talks with friends and colleagues encouraged him to appoint March the 6th, that's this Friday, as a phone-free day. He says he realises that people will still have to use their phones, but Ben says there is so much we can do to reduce phone use. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Nalini and Jordan. Nalini, is this a genius idea or is this absolute guilt-tripping?
I'm pleased it's Friday, because Friday is not as busy as Monday. But Wallace, my phone is my office, and I work primarily with the food industry, with the food sector, which means that I could be receiving questions or orders or interest either through Instagram, Messenger, Facebook, email, text. So I'm constantly looking at my phone, and that is because that is where my business sits. So for me to be without the phone on Friday could be a real challenge, but I'm willing to put myself through that challenge.
Oh, right. I was thinking, Jordan, if I could actually do it, like actually keep my phone at home, get on the bus or cycle to work, not have the phone to look at in your morning coffee, get through lunch. It's actually... Is it sad how much of a daunting issue it is?
Do you remember those photos that came out a while ago where some artists took photos of people were looking at their phones and then blanked the phones out so they weren't there? I think that shows how awful it is. I'm completely addicted to the bloody thing. Like, there's no doubt about it. And I used to have joyful days on weekends when I didn't carry it around for a few hours until the earthquakes came along. And now I feel like it's too dangerous to not have the damn thing with me the whole time. So, look, I don't know if it'll work for some people. I'm not going to do a phone-free Friday, I'm afraid. But
you're not?
Well, I didn't know about it until I was prepping for the panel, to be honest. I'll have a bit of a think about it. But I can sit at my desk in my office and get 90% of the stuff that I would otherwise get. So it only is a phone call and text message problem. So that's easy for me, but other people will be in different situations.
Interesting documentary on Al Jazeera, one of these sort of algorithmists from, I think it was Google, saying that cognitive behaviours are studied, so methods employed by the likes of Facebook and online platforms, they make them very similar to gambling, so practices deployed in gambling are the practices that we use for making sure that you stick to your phone and you stay there. The little likes, making sure that those likes come up regularly. The unpredictable behaviour of actually scrolling through content. Nalini, is it a worry to you that we're actually gambling our life away?
I think if you're an addict, you'll find a way.
All right. Wallace, I refuse to own a smartphone. Life is just fine with a dumb phone. I spent 6 weeks in Ecuador with no phone at all, says Andy. Nalini, Jordan, thank you very much for being with us on the panel this afternoon.
Thanks.
I'm Wallace Chapman.
Wallace.
Back tomorrow. Checkpoint is next. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, and then there was two. A North Shore mum recently returned from Italy is confirmed to have coronavirus. Health officials race to track down dozens of the woman's close contacts, while her sick partner waits on his test results. A luxury retailer asks workers to take voluntary redundancy and cut hours after coronavirus kills sales. 70 Auckland Uni medical students on overseas postings are told to come home immediately due to the outbreak. For the first time, Japanese officials flag the Olympics may be postponed. And more water restrictions go on in Northland as the big dry continues and seawater threatens streams and lakes. And is Wellington cemeteries running out of space? RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. Health officials are tracking down people who sat near a coronavirus-infected woman on 2 domestic flights. The Auckland woman is the second person in New Zealand to be diagnosed with COVID-19, but her husband is also unwell and has been tested. She is in quarantine at home with him and her 2 children, both of whom have been taken out of school. The Health Ministry says the woman took a return flight from Auckland to Palmerston North on Monday, and it's seeking the passengers who were sitting in her row and the 2 rows in front and behind. Officials are also looking at other places she may have visited, including 2 medical centres. The principal of Westlake Boys High School says he was shocked to learn one of his students is the son of the infected Auckland woman. Parents were emailed at midday with the news, and David Ferguson says a handful of students were taken home by parents afterwards.
We certainly haven't had a mass rush for the gates or the car park. There hasn't been a traffic jam of people coming in to pick the boys up, so I guess we'll see tomorrow how many are here as well.
David Ferguson says no one at the school is at risk. The boy's sister attends Westlake Girls High School, where no one else is at risk either. Cabinet ministers have agreed in principle to remove the stand-down period for people needing welfare help if their workplaces and their employment are affected by COVID-19. They're also looking to see if a road project can be brought forward to create work on the East Coast, where forestry workers and other companies are feeling the effects of a downturn in trade. The police have searched a Christchurch property and arrested a 19-year-old man while investigating a weekend threat against the city's Al Noor Mosque. They say the man has been charged on an unrelated matter and they are still investigating the threat. Katie Todd reports.
A picture of a person outside the mosque and a threatening commentary were reportedly sent to thousands of people through an encrypted messaging app. The police say a number of people have been sharing the picture, which is abhorrent and won't be tolerated. The picture has been referred to the chief censor to decide if it should be classified as objectionable material. In Christchurch, Katie Todd.
A police officer has gone on trial accused of raping a female colleague in Northland. The 29-year-old, who has kept his name secret on appeal, denies one charge of sexual violation and another of indecent assault. He is accused of raping his colleague in a kirikiri motel where they'd been put up with a large group of officers working during Waitangi Day commemorations last year. Today, Crown Prosecutor Fiona Kalaini told the jury the man snuck into the woman's room and violated her as she slept.
He helped himself, members of the jury, to the sleeping complainant. He took the risks, given his own intoxication and sense of entitlement.
However, the man's lawyer, Paul Borich, says the encounter was a pre-arranged consensual hookup. Joe Biden is making a strong run in today's Super Tuesday primaries, in which 14 US states choose who they want to be the Democratic Party's candidate for the presidency. 7 states have so far been called for Mr Biden and 2 for Bernie Sanders. Mr Biden told supporters he has proved the doubters wrong.
And we're told, well, when you got to Super Tuesday, it'd be over. Well, it may be over for the other guy. Tell that to the folks in Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Minnesota.
However, Mr Sanders is favoured to win the biggest prize, California, where polls have just closed. It's 4 minutes past 5. High Performance Sport New Zealand says the sports system is failing the country's top female coaches. Spokesperson Sonia Bolland says many more women should be following in the footsteps of trailblazing Chanel Pompellier, who has today been appointed Breakers' assistant coach. While Pompellier is not the first female to coach in the ANBL, Bolland says her appointment will hopefully make other sports take notice.
There's no shortage of talented, inspiring female coaches in New Zealand, but there is a failure in the system at the moment to support them to succeed in those roles. And appointments like Chanel's by the Breakers today is really critical to raising the visibility of female coaches, but also challenging the stereotype of what it means to be an elite coach in New Zealand.
Sonia Bolland. Fast bowler Lockie Ferguson could be forgiven for some trepidation at the prospect of returning to Australia, but the Black Cap international says he's confident of a better outcome this time around. It's not the 3-0 Test series loss he's scarred by, but rather the memory of limping off with a calf injury in his Test debut in Perth. But he's about to return, having been named for the Chapel Hadley one-day series starting in Sydney next week.
Geez, my debut outing there wasn't great, and then Test debut not great, so hopefully I can rectify some of that and get through a first game, the full game. But the prep I've been doing has been really good, and body for the most part is feeling good.
Lockie Ferguson. That's the news.
The Fed moves.
The Fed lowered its Fed funds rate to 1 to 1.25%. Makes money cheaper to borrow, and that's supposed to be oxygen in an economy.
But we're not doing enough, says National.
Grant Robertson doesn't have any sense of a comprehensive overall economic plan.
And another perspective.
Things like food delivery, which is phenomenal for plastic wastage, that's ground to a halt. So yeah, there's some positives for the environment.
Up to the minute coverage. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Metzuris to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, scattered showers. Some heavy today with thunderstorms possible about Coromandel and Northland. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Showers today, some heavy, possible thunderstorms, isolated downpours in eastern Waikato, Bay of Plenty and eastern Taupo. Fine weather tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay rain with possible thunderstorms and isolated downpours, easing to showers tonight. For Wairarapa, cloudy periods and a few showers. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough excluding the Kaikoura coast. Partly cloudy today, remaining showers clearing tonight, mainly fine tomorrow. For the Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, patchy rain clearing tonight, then fine breaks developing. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also Otago and Southland, mainly fine. A shower or two is possible north of Greymouth until early tomorrow. Chatham Islands, rain possibly heavy, easing to a few showers tonight. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5. Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Public health officials are racing to track down dozens of people who may have been in close contact with the second New Zealander diagnosed with coronavirus. The woman in her 30s returned from northern Italy last week before the restrictions for returning travellers to isolate themselves were in place. And as she started to feel unwell, she took 2 domestic flights this week between Auckland and Palmerston North. She tested positive for the disease last night after getting a swab by her GP. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn filed this report.
The second case of COVID-19 is confirmed in a New Zealand citizen. This is a woman in her 30s, recently returned to Auckland from northern Italy.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, confirming the news that the World Health Organisation had released minutes earlier. He says the Auckland woman is able to stay at home in isolation with her family. She returned from Italy on Tuesday last week on Air New Zealand flight NZ0283 from Singapore. And on Monday, she flew between Palmerston North and Auckland on NZ5103 and NZ8114. She has also visited 2 medical centres. The race is now on to find those who have been in contact with her.
The Auckland Regional Public Health Service gets a day-by-day, movement-by-movement description and then does an assessment of, in particular, whether there is any potential for close contact. And I've talked about the settings that we are actively following up in the first instance, or the public health unit is the flights, of course, as well as the medical centres that were visited.
Mr Bloomfield says those most at risk are those who have been in very close contact with the woman. Her husband has shown symptoms of coronavirus, and testing to reveal whether he too is infected is due back later today. But there's also a risk to those sitting near her on the plane to and from Palmerston North, either in her row or in the 2 rows on either side. And ministry officials will be contacting people on the Singapore flight too. That could be dozens of people.
The immediate circle of family and close friends who have been followed up with public health and are now in self-isolation is small. The woman has not been feeling well. Yes, she travelled to Palmerston North and back, and that is the focus of our efforts at contact tracing on those flights. However, this is exactly the sort of contact tracing we would expect to do and are geared up to do, and is well underway now.
He says anyone on either of the flights should ring Healthline if they're worried. Dr Bloomfield says 2 of the women's children go to Westlake Boys and Westlake Girls high schools. They are at home in isolation. The Westlake Boys principal, David Ferguson, says they've emailed all their families around midday with the news. He says they've been told by public health authorities that no one at the school is at risk, with the boys staying at home.
We put a message out to the community about what had happened, but the advice we were given that there was no risk to any of the students or staff here and that we could carry on as usual.
Parent Jin Kai has just finished a 14-day self-isolation period himself after returning from a business trip in South China. His wife, Susan Fan, says the school hadn't told them anything, and they want to know which year the children of the now isolated woman are in.
Looks like only the Asian, only the Chinese worry. Everybody looks
very relaxed.
Very relaxed.
Yeah, because we need to be very cautious about that.
All travellers returning to New Zealand from northern Italy are required to isolate themselves, but those restrictions weren't in place when the woman returned. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the current restrictions remain the same. She says Cabinet will now meet every Wednesday to discuss COVID-19 and its impacts, but can convene at any other time if needed. For Checkpoint, Rowan Quinn, DNA.
Now, Checkpoint spoke to the woman who is confirmed to have coronavirus earlier today. The woman says she's okay, but she is concerned about the privacy of her family. Meanwhile, a luxury retail brand is asking Auckland workers to take voluntary redundancy, cut their hours or take unpaid leave after sales have dived in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak. DFS Galleria in Auckland's CBD sells brands like Burberry, Versace, Prada and Tom Ford, to name a few, and it relies heavily on the tourist market. Kate Davis from the First Union says 100 workers are now facing an uncertain future, and she expects the problem to spread to other retail stores.
It's devastating. I've actually just left the meetings. So I've just done 2 meetings back to back, and then I did a meeting last night in the evening as well. And it's the company notifying staff that due to this huge impact that the lack of travel has had on the business, they're asking the workers, they're consulting with them about taking voluntary redundancy or a voluntary reduction in hours or voluntary unpaid leave.
So where does this leave the workers?
A lot less better off and feeling incredibly insecure, because of course they know that if they don't take up the offer by the company, that eventually there's going to be only one end result, which is going to be permanent redundancy. I think the company have done a really good job so far. They've applied with all of the legislative requirements that they have to. There's absolutely no hesitation in paying people to self-quarantine, no hesitation in making sure that they have everything that they're supposed to supply. But now, unfortunately, you can go into the Customs Street store and there's just nobody walking around. The store is completely empty, and there's just, your $55,000 Gucci handbag sitting on a shelf looking very lonely.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, what kind of product does this store sell? We're talking high-end, aren't we?
This is your high-end store. Totally. So it's owned by Louis Vuitton, Moet and Hennessy. So this is your top brands. They own Tiffany. They own Marc Jacobs. So this is, the very top end, top dollar stuff. But they also have an entire floor dedicated to high-end New Zealand product, $1,000 Manuka honey. So they've got a whole floor of New Zealand product as well. But it's a very expensive store, and we've got very skilled staff who have been there for a long time. Most of the staff, it's a minimum requirement that they speak 2 languages. We've got workers that have been there up to 28 years who speak 6 languages.
So how are they feeling about the prospect of cutting hours? Because obviously cut hours means cut pay.
They want to help, but you could see them sitting there calculating in their heads how they're going to pay their rent in Auckland. They're still retail workers. They pay a little bit better. Our union members are all on a living wage, so they pay a little bit better than most other retailers, but at the end of the day, they're retail workers paying rent in Auckland.
So how many staff are we talking about here?
100. And it's a site where we've got really good union density, so about 89% are union members, and the company have worked with us every step of the way. So they are very much an example of how to do this as well as you can. But is there a good way to do redundancy? At the end of it, it's still going to result in unemployment.
Do you know how many people they are wanting to take voluntary redundancy? Have they put a number on it?
No. We have asked them for that number, and I'm sure they will supply it by the end of the week, but we've asked them what their minimum safe staffing level is, and that is the kind of cut they're looking at making. They're getting down to the very nitty-gritty. I spoke to one member who hadn't served anybody at an entire day. And if you walk through the floors now, it's just full of very shiny, very expensive and somewhat ridiculous products. Just my personal view on Versace. But yeah, it's a very sad store, which has normally been one of my favourite sites to visit.
So normally, who would the main customers be then?
Oh, that's all tourists. It's a 100% tourist market, and a huge portion of that, of course, is an Asian market. So they get lots of Chinese tour buses, and of course, with that aspect gone, I think I saw a couple of lonely Americans looking at Ralph Lauren polos.
Do you know how financially bad the hit is that they're taking? How bad is it for them?
So I haven't heard this from the company. This is rumour from the staff, but it looks to be about a 90% reduction in what they would usually turn over.
So that's what staff are telling you?
Yep. Yeah, it's bad. It really is bad. And this isn't the kind of company that would do this unless they had to. However, they do have lots of other stores and other brands, so we're really hoping that even though we've got redundancy clauses and union support, that they'll roll that out to their other stores if they're going to spread, which are stores like Sephora, which has got a couple of hundred staff.
Well, that is the thing. So could this be the first domino? There are a number of these luxury brand stores down around Queen Street. What are you hearing about the retail sector, full stop?
We're writing to the company to request that there's a hiring freeze across all of the boutique brands, because most of them are owned by the parent company here, and that they try to look at redeployment where they can. But they're all going to be hit the same. So I should imagine they're going to be in the same situation. We haven't heard anything yet, but I have asked the workers at DFS to let me know what they hear as soon as possible.
So, Kate, are we potentially talking about hundreds of workers who are going to be affected in the retail sector, potentially with requests to cut hours or take voluntary redundancy?
We are looking at one store at the moment, but it is a microcosm of, I guess, what is going to be a greater problem. I think if you look at stores like Sephora, they're less dependent on the tourist stores. But what I'm thinking is not just the high-end boutiques, but then if you look at like the little or the huge souvenir stores and the stores that are dependent on selling sheepskin rugs and what have you at the bottom of Queen Street, all of them are going to be affected. And I don't see how they can maintain.
So in terms of the company's response, they seem to be indicating that this is a global problem for their brand.
Yeah, it is. We already know that the Macau store has been closed down. The Singapore store was closed for a while due to the fact that they had a tour operator in who was carrying the virus.
And that's Kate Davis from First Union. Now, in a statement, DFS Group says, in view of the impact that COVID-19 is having on our communities and people, DFS is introducing voluntary flexible work arrangements to our employees. These include voluntary unpaid leave and voluntary part-time working in some of our stores and offices. It's intended to support our employees during slower business conditions and an uncertain environment. They go on to say, we look forward to welcoming travellers in all our locations when the situation improves. It is 19 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We'd love to hear from you, particularly if you're working in the retail sector. Let us know if your employer is asking you to reduce your working hours or take unpaid leave. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz.
Government ministers have agreed in principle to remove the stand-down period for people seeking income support from MSD due to COVID-19. Speaking a short time ago, Jacinda Ardern said ministers would be meeting regularly every Wednesday to reassess its response. It comes as the US Federal Reserve cut its main interest rate by 0.5 percentage point in an emergency move to counter the rapidly spreading coronavirus. The cut underlines the seriousness of the crisis and follows yesterday's 0.25% reduction by Australia's Reserve Bank. The ABC's Peter Ryan reports.
The US Federal Reserve was widely expected to cut rates at its scheduled meeting in a fortnight's time. But this morning's emergency action is the latest sign of the coronavirus threat to the US economy and the global economy, according to the Fed's chairman, Jerome Powell.
The spread of the coronavirus has brought new challenges and risks, and our thoughts and prayers go out to those who've been harmed. The virus and the measures that are being taken to contain it will surely weigh on economic activity, both here and abroad, for some time.
The US rate cut is the latest in coordinated intervention by global central banks. Yesterday, Australia's Reserve Bank moved first, cutting the cash rate by 0.25 percentage point to a new record low, with a follow-up expected in April. Jerome Powell concedes cutting rates is no direct solution to the coronavirus, but he says it's the message that the world's biggest central bank will do what it takes.
We do recognise that a rate cut will not reduce the rate of infection. It won't fix a broken supply chain. We get that. We don't think we have all the answers. But we do believe that our action will provide a meaningful boost to the economy.
The lockdown in China continues to fuel uncertainty and stall business activity around the world. Mike Fluitt, chief executive of the British prestige car maker McLaren, joins other automotive giants on the brink of suspending production.
If it doesn't start returning to normality, then yes, it will have an impact, and we are developing some alternative sourcing opportunities where we can. But we don't have multiple sources for a company this size.
With Australia leading the rate-cutting action, the big focus is on the broader economy and official growth figures out this morning for the final 3 months of last year, before the bushfires in southeastern Australia and the coronavirus. While today's numbers will confirm a softening economy, AMP Capital Investors chief economist Shane Oliver says the next GDP reading out in June will almost certainly show a contraction.
I think we're going to take quite a significant hit. We'll see the March quarter go backwards, and that's largely on the back of the bushfires and then more recently the coronavirus impact. A lot of that will come from tourism, but also higher education, less demand for our commodity exports. Right now, you'd have to say there is a rising risk the June quarter could be negative as well.
No one's calling a recession just yet. That's 2 consecutive negative quarters. But Australia's world-beating 29 years of unbroken economic growth is in real peril unless the coronavirus is contained.
Peter Ryan with that report. Now, joining us live is our Health Minister, David Clark. Good evening, Minister. Has anyone else tested positive?
Good evening, Lisa. No, I have not had any further reports, but you'll be aware that today we announced the second case of COVID-19 confirmed in New Zealand.
When are you expecting the test results on that woman's partner?
I would expect that they'll be back later this evening. As I say, I have not yet heard back from health officials on that, but I would expect that to be later today.
And will you make the results public as soon as you get them?
Yes, the Ministry of Health has worked hard to try and make sure results are out as quickly as possible in these situations. Obviously, in the first instance, they have to let any people directly affected know. That is a priority. And today, where there was a family situation, make sure that the schools where this family had children enrolled had the appropriate information, accurate information, which indicated there was next to no risk for the schools. But you can imagine the panic if that hadn't been lined up first to make sure there was really good information for those schools in place.
Because the thing is that Ashley Bloomfield has said the New Zealand public will be made aware as soon as the results are known. But the results came in at 6 p.m. last night, and in fact, the World Health Organization beat you to the draw, didn't they? That's how the general public found out what was going on. Is that right?
It was. I think the World Health Organization was one of those outfits that was informed. There's a very clear protocol around making sure that first the family, those affected, those who've been tested, are informed first. That medical staff are updated, the WHO, and I think it was within minutes that then the public were told. But we are working to make sure that people are informed as soon as possible, because it's important to have a clear and accurate picture of where things are at. But I think people will understand that making sure those directly affected, like those who might be connected to the family through schools or other activities, making sure they have accurate and up-to-date information first has got to be the priority. We're focused on making sure that public health is the first priority.
Because it's a trust issue, isn't it, that the public can trust you to present the information to them. And again today, in announcing the airline flights that this woman was on, some of that information was incorrect too. That was put out into the public domain by the Ministry of Health, wasn't it?
Well, it's really important that we get all the details right, because otherwise people can naturally develop fears. So there's a lot of checking going on. You'll appreciate these are rapidly evolving situations, and I have to say I've been impressed so far by how quickly the public health people move. Of course, because they're already doing the contact tracing as quickly as they can, there's a risk that some of the information becomes public before announcements are made. They're moving at pace, but we're endeavouring to keep the public informed as best we can along the way, whilst putting public health and safety as our number one priority.
So why isn't this woman in hospital or somewhere in controlled isolation?
Well,
like at
there's very good
Whangaparoa,
reason
for example.
for that. Yeah, there's very good reason for that. The evidence suggests that 80% of people recover from the COVID virus without further special medical intervention. Self-isolation is a proven and effective way of containing things. Epidemiologists will tell you that. It's based on past experience with these similar kinds of illness, and now we see overseas. Part of the advantage of us moving very quickly on border restrictions has been that we have had COVID arrive here later than many other countries.
I understand that, Minister, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's given us the chance
but
to make sure we've got the right strategy in place.
I'm just wanting clarity around this particular point, because that seems to fly in the face of what you've been telling us previously. So people from the Diamond Princess and people who were evacuated from Wuhan, they were put in isolation at Whangaparoa. So was that just for perception?
I think in the very early stages of the outbreak, we were taking a cautious approach based on the fact that the actual understanding of the virus was at a very early stage, and we are learning day by day about the nature of the virus.
So you're no longer taking a cautious approach?
I know we're certainly taking a cautious approach based on the best scientific evidence that we've got and the medical advice. We are. I mean, today the expert advisory group has met again. One of the pieces of information that's come through in the last few days is that actually the rates of infection amongst people under the age of 19 are incredibly low in China through a big study there. 2.4% only of people who've been infected by the virus under the age of 19. These are emerging facts. The fact that people don't seem to be conveying the virus unless they are symptomatic is different to the flu. So there's a lot of things that are emerging, and as I say, it's
so was the
that
isolation of the Diamond Princess passengers and the Wuhan people unnecessary in reality?
Look, I think in the context of the information that we had at that time, and particularly in the terms of the Diamond Princess, where that had to be one of the most intensely concentrated outbreaks in the world, we were right to take a cautious approach.
But it wasn't actually necessary. That's what you're saying now, based on the information you have.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying based on the information we had at the time, it was very clearly the right thing to do, and we make no apology for putting the public safety of New Zealanders first.
Okay, so this woman now, in the case announced today, she arrived back in New Zealand on the 25th of February. Northern Italy was already in lockdown at the time she got on her plane to come home, but New Zealand had no isolation restrictions around that region until Monday. Does that indicate to you that you moved way too slowly on those border controls?
When she got onto the plane on the 24th of February in Italy, there was 124 cases, I think, in the whole of Italy at that stage, which is a very big country with millions and millions and millions of people.
But most of them in northern Italy?
Yes, and only 124 cases at that stage when she boarded the plane. She was not unwell. And New Zealand, in fact, was one of the first countries to move on asking people to go into self-isolation that came from Italy. There are a number of Pacific countries and Israel and the UK now, I think, only. We are amongst the first movers in the world, but again, that cautious approach, I think, is serving us well.
Even if you were a first mover on this, evidence is that you did move too late, or we wouldn't have a case who had been out in the community.
I think we've got to look at this in the context of a global outbreak where we've got over 90,000 cases. New Zealand now has 2 confirmed cases. We have been effective at keeping this out. Of course, as the situation develops, our Australian neighbours have over 30 cases now. We look across in the United States where they are beginning to believe they've got a community outbreak. This situation is changing day by day, and that's why we're asking the expert advisory group to meet every day and give us an update. We want to act on the best medical advice and the best scientific advice available.
So how many contacts are you trying to trace for this woman, and how many have you managed to make contact with as of now?
I haven't had the exact numbers, but what I can tell you is that certainly obviously the schools are not at risk. That's been made clear from our public health experts.
Isn't that vital information? Are you not being briefed on this, Minister?
To answer your question, Lisa, the close friends and family that had been in close contact with the family have been contacted and put in self-isolation. I'm aware of that. Where they are up to in terms of tracking the people on the airline, I have not yet had that briefing.
So what advice is now being given around domestic travel, and what briefings have you had on that?
In terms of domestic travel, at this stage, there are no implications. But as I say, we're day by day receiving advice from doctors and asking questions.
So currently, how many people do you have who are presenting symptoms that could be COVID-19 that you are waiting on tests for?
Well, every day at the moment there's about anywhere between 20 and 40 people getting tested. As you'll know, we've had close to 200 tests now with only 2 positive tests. So
but numbers
the bar to
exhibiting
testing
close
is low.
Symptoms?
We've only had a handful or fewer of those who've actually been suspected cases. So, you know,
and
again,
how many
we're going to be asking the
outstanding
question.
now with suspected cases?
Well, I know of one that is a suspected case. We're testing the partner of this woman that has tested positive.
Appreciate you joining us. That is the Health Minister, David Clark. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a last-minute surge from Joe Biden on Super Tuesday. A police officer goes on trial accused of raping a female colleague in Northland. And the New Zealand Breakers appoints their first female assistant coach. And apparently Wellington cemeteries are running out of space. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program so far this evening. Do get in touch, whether it's coronavirus, whether you're in the retail industry and your hours may be being cut. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Health officials are tracking down people who sat near a coronavirus-infected woman on 2 domestic flights. The Auckland woman is the second person in New Zealand to be diagnosed with COVID-19, but her husband is also unwell and has been tested. She's in quarantine at home with him and her 2 children. The woman took a return flight from Auckland to Palmerston North on Monday, and the Health Ministry is seeking nearby passengers. Health Minister David Clark has told Checkpoint that no one else in her family has tested positive, and if this is the case, the public will know immediately. He says the first people to know will be anyone connected to the patient, and there is a clear protocol for the release of information. The Minister says the patient is not in hospital, as the evidence suggests that 80% of people recover from the virus without medical intervention or hospitalisation. Cabinet ministers have agreed in principle to remove the stand-down period for people needing welfare help if their workplaces and their employment are affected by COVID-19. They're also looking to see if a road project can be brought forward to create work on the East Coast, where forestry workers are among those feeling the effects of a trade downturn. The police have searched a Christchurch property and arrested a 19-year-old man while investigating a weekend online threat against the city's Al Noor Mosque. The police say he has been charged on an unrelated matter, and they're continuing to investigate the threat against the mosque, which was one of the 2 at the centre of last year's shooting massacre. A picture of a person outside the mosque and a threatening commentary were reportedly sent to thousands of people. Water restrictions have been extended to communities along Northland's east coast whose water supplies are at risk of being contaminated, making it undrinkable. The Regional Council has imposed the restriction to conserve water because there's a risk seawater could get into drying bores, streams, rivers and lakes. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time now for business news with Nona Peltier, who's joined me in the studio. Nona, COVID-19 virus, it is infecting the business world. So let's talk about the advice that businesses are being offered. What are some of the recommendations to them?
So Business New Zealand has offered some advice that would really be for advice for government on how government can help businesses. And the advice that they're saying, look, if you can, please pay your bills promptly. So if you're dealing with small, medium-sized companies, pay your bill within like 5 to 10 days. Don't wait a month to settle accounts. That will help with cash flow. Also, think about deferring provisional tax payments, GST payments, that type of thing. And of course, some of the other measures that we've already heard about that might bring work programs forward and so on. But one of the more specific recommendations is that the government offer targeted support for businesses, much like they did with the earthquakes that we had in 2011. Then, of course, the Kaikoura one more recently rather. And those programs can help businesses specifically and alleviate some of the issues that they're facing right now, which is mostly uncertainty, of course. And of course cash flow, because people aren't going out. And I mean, one of the other big recommendations would be something that the Reserve Bank governor has been saying for some time is, for goodness sake, go out there and spend your money. Don't wait until your favorite restaurant goes out of business.
Yeah, but that's a double-edged sword. I mean, because we have obviously been doing a story earlier in the program about a retail business that is asking workers to cut their hours and to take unpaid leave. I mean, they're not going to be wanting to spend money. They're going to want to squirrel it away.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. There's a real pressure point there, and it's a matter of striking the balance just right. So one of the things that could happen, of course, if you help businesses out and they can keep their staff, that's one of the packages that was recommended and used during the crisis that was the Christchurch earthquake, for example. They started providing support packages to businesses after the September earthquake in 2010, because I went back and checked. So there was support offered early on to help businesses keep their staff employed. And that's critical because, the turnaround could come quite quickly. And when it does, you don't want to be scrambling around looking for staff. That's another issue that New Zealand has with the labour shortages in many skilled areas. So if people start saying, well, I can't find work, well, it's a big problem that needs some kind of addressing in a way that we've dealt with other crises. And I mean, spending money isn't a bad way of helping businesses out if you are planning to, I guess I'm not a health reporter, so I don't know what the advice is, but I don't think that anybody here is being told not to go out, not to spend money, not to socialize. And I think in the meantime, businesses certainly could use the support, that's for sure, because they're not getting the tourist numbers that they were getting before. And that we've seen that with business travel being deferred and so forth. So it's quite a difficult situation, and there's going to be a lot more to come. So we haven't heard enough yet about what the other impacts are going to be.
So how have the markets been looking today?
Interesting, mixed somewhat. The New Zealand market, I'll just start with that one, has reacted fairly well today, and it finished up 0.2%. That's the NZX Top 50 Index. It rose by 71 points to 11,418. That's the second day in a row that it's had a lift. You can contrast that with the Australian market. At the moment, they're down 1.75%. That's their ASX 200. And Asian markets are in the black, but only just in the black. And that followed on from Wall Street, which really had quite a volatile day, which is in the middle of the session. The U.S. Federal Reserve decided to cut the official cash rate there, which is the equivalent, the interest rates there, by a whole half basis point. That's 0.50 basis points. So that's a half a percentage point. That's more than I think people were expecting right away, and certainly it was a surprise move. And not something that's been seen since the 2008 global financial crisis, which gives you an idea of how serious it is. And yet, the market took a look at that, digested it, thought, oh, pretty good. And then it was like, no, not so good. And back, just, hammered really, and finished, had a terrible day in the end. So, but that didn't flow through to the New Zealand market. So that shows that we do have some resilience here, and our companies are still valued.
So what did that mean for our dollar? Because obviously people will be watching that exporters.
Yeah.
In particular.
So earlier this week, our dollar was quite low. It was like it got down to a multi-year low. It was like 61 point some cents. I don't remember exactly, but it was quite low. And then it came up a little bit. At the moment, it's 62.8 US cents. Now, you wouldn't be surprised by that because the US Federal Reserve has dropped their rates, and the Australians also dropped their rate yesterday too. So that means that the New Zealand dollar is sitting in a kind of a sort of in-between spot at the moment. The Reserve Bank came out today, though, and kind of put cold water on the idea that it's going to move sooner than later. So it's going to hang on. It basically said that they're not going to be announcing any changes to monetary policy before the date that's due, which is later in March. So that was kind of interesting that they took that step to sort of tell the market.
Close down expectations.
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good way of putting it. And so, 62.8 US cents and 95.1 Australian. So we lost... 95.1 Australian and 49 British pence. And so when you think about those numbers, we use those numbers, we're always talking about them. That's about where we've been for a while. So you'd have to say the Kiwi's holding pretty steady against its major partners. And earlier today, I was listening to our business editor who was talking quite a lot about the subject. And, he pointed out, and it's quite staggering, that 50% of New Zealand's trade is with China and Australia. And both of those economies are struggling at the moment. So it's not a surprise that we should be having feeling the effects of that here.
Yeah, and it's keeping our business team very busy.
Okay.
That was Nona Balsier with our business news. To the US now, where it's Super Tuesday in the Democratic presidential primary. 14 states have been voting for their preferred candidate to take on President Trump in November's election. Joe Biden has had 9 states called for him, while Bernie Sanders has scooped 4, with others too close to call. But exit polls are showing Bernie Sanders has won the big one, which is California. Joe Biden's biggest and potentially most surprising win has been in Minnesota. It's a state Bernie Sanders won decisively in 2016. But tonight it's been called as Mr. Biden's, a day after the state's Senator Amy Klobuchar dropped out of the race and endorsed him. That shows how critical those endorsements for Mr. Biden were. This was his message to supporters.
And we're told, well, when it got to Super Tuesday, it'd be over. Well, it may be over for the other guy. Tell that to the folks in Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Minnesota.
Joe Biden's main competitor, Bernie Sanders, was the clear front-runner a few days ago, but the sting was taken out of his tail after Joe Biden's big win in South Carolina and the endorsements from moderates who dropped out and got behind him. Despite that, Mr. Sanders is claiming victory. This was him a short time ago, before the Californian results were called.
But tonight, I tell you with absolute confidence, we are going to win the Democratic nomination. And we are going to defeat the most dangerous president in the history of this country.
That's Senator Bernie Sanders. And back home now, a police officer has gone on trial accused of raping a female colleague in Northland. The 29-year-old man, who can't be named, faces one charge of indecent assault and one of sexual violation by unlawful sexual connection. The incident is alleged to have happened at a Kirikiri motel in the early hours of February last year, the 5th of February. Our court reporter Annika Smith filed this story.
Prosecutor Fiona Kalani opened the Crown's case this afternoon, telling the jury the man and his alleged victim were both working during Waitangi commemorations in Northland last year. She said the pair were socialising in a group at a motel the night before Waitangi Day, joking around and playing drinking games, including sculling beer out of a hollowed-out police baton.
The atmosphere was lively, it was jovial, people were laughing and joking, playing around, pushing each other, shoving each other, putting arms around each other and generally having fun and being a bit silly, made all the more jolly, no doubt, by the beers that they were consuming.
Ms. Kalani said at one point the complainant went to fetch another beer out of the defendant's motel unit. She said when she was inside, she noticed the man who beckoned her into a room before closing the door. The prosecutor said he then made a move.
to use what might be a colloquial term, he tried to come on to her. But he did a lot more than that. He went a lot further, members of the jury. He put his hands down her shorts and he rubbed her genital area over the top of her underwear.
Ms. Kalani said the woman blocked her face to prevent the man from kissing her and pushed his hands away from her groin.
And she's saying, nah, I'm married, you're married, stop this. And he says something like, no one has to know, come on.
Ms. Kalani said the complainant left the room and the drinking continued until the early hours of the morning. The court heard the woman sat outside drinking water and eating crackers with a senior officer before going to bed herself.
Unbeknownst to, at 2:34 a.m, the defendant made his way quietly across the motel courtyard from his unit to hers. He slowly inched the ranch slider door open and he let himself inside.
Ms. Kalani said the complainant awoke to a painful feeling in her privates and the man in her bed telling her to keep quiet. The prosecutor said the woman sat up and asked the man what he was doing, swearing at him.
His response to her made her feel as though she was being manipulated. He was saying, I've got a wife and kid, don't do this to me. What do you want to do about it? What do you want me to do about it? He's saying to her, having just raped her.
Ms. Kalani said the woman then felt her phone underneath her pillow and made a short recording of their interaction, played to the jury this afternoon. In it, you can hear a man's muffled voice and the woman saying she had denied him earlier and awoken to him having sex with her. Ms. Kalani said the man left the room and told a friend he'd had consensual sex with the woman when she began crying. But the prosecutor said no sleeping person can give consent.
He helped himself, members of the jury, to the sleeping complainant. He took the risks, given his own intoxication and sense of entitlement.
The man's defence lawyer, Paul Borich QC, said any sexual activity between the pair was consensual and part of a pre-arranged hookup. He asked the jury to focus on the pair's interactions during the hours of socialising that night and the heavy police presence at the motel.
Probably more police per square foot than anywhere in Northland that night. And on the Crown case, the defendant goes to commit rape on his work colleague the next day. And he's lucky enough to find that she's left the door open.
Mr. Borich said the man had found the door unlocked for a reason.
It was pre-arranged. This was not rape, this was regret. This was regret by a complainant who was worried about the moral consequences of a bad choice to have a hookup.
Trial Judge Evangelos Thomas refused to grant the man continued name suppression this week, but his identity remains secret on appeal. The trial is set down for 2 weeks. At the Auckland District Court, this is Arnica Smith.
What happens when you relinquish your citizenship and then want it back? That's what happened to 74-year-old Vivian Hill. She left New Zealand when she was 55 to live in Norway, which at the time did not allow dual citizenship. But her Norwegian husband died, one of her children is back in New Zealand, and she wants to come home. She's found it's not straightforward to become an immigrant in your own home country. Although she regrets her decision to give up her New Zealand citizenship now, she told our reporter Jill Bonnet that at the time it was the right thing to do.
I provided 24-hour nursing care for 4 years for my husband who was dying. I had to protect the security and well-being of 2 young teenage daughters at the time, and I couldn't run the risk of us having to, the total disruption and chaos of suddenly having to sell a house upon the event of my husband's death. So the only way I could secure things for my kids at the time was to take out citizenship. But I tried to keep New Zealand citizenship and they didn't allow it. I had to do what I did at that time. It was right at that time. But it's absolutely ridiculous now. And when people say to me, what are you doing in Norway? Why are you living in Norway? I said, by accident, to be honest.
And so tell me about how you've come to decide about returning to New Zealand.
Well, of course, as time went by, my husband died, inevitably. And at that point in time, I hesitated because my 2 daughters that were with me seemed to be embracing a lifestyle here. And I hesitated, and I thought, well, I can't go back. I changed the citizenship status to protect them, and I can hardly turn around and get on a plane and leave these young adults merrily skipping along without family or anything. However, the irony is that subsequently one child has, of course, grown up and returned to New Zealand about 4 years ago. She's established a new life for herself as a young adult down there. And the other one's still here, wanting to go back. It's really quite an ironic situation, you know. My Norwegian grandson has an automatic right to New Zealand citizenship and he's got a passport.
Have you looked into whether you can become a citizen of New Zealand again?
Yes, about 2 years ago I began intensive research. I've got a pile of A4 papers of info, downloads, handwritten notes. There are differing criteria re the Department of Internal Affairs. Off the top of my head, I haven't got the terminology, but one category is time lived in New Zealand, but then it's qualified in some way, which I thought, well, that sounds like a hiccup. It doesn't quite fit. Parents who have lived in New Zealand, yes, but there was some qualification for that didn't seem to quite fit, and I just don't fit in anywhere.
Ms Hill says she would be happy to come back as an immigrant but cannot see how she qualifies for residence either. The Department of Internal Affairs says its minister can exercise discretion to grant citizenship where there are exceptional circumstances and it would be in the public interest to do so. There is no specific provision for people who renounce their New Zealand citizenship, but it says Ms Hill should speak to a citizenship case officer. Government figures show 76 people renounced their New Zealand citizenship last year, more than double the number 5 years ago. It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Get in touch about that one. Do you think she should be allowed to get her New Zealand citizenship back? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A Wellington councillor says the city's cemeteries are at a critical point, with concerns mounting that they might soon run out of space. The council currently manages 2 active cemeteries, but one of them, Karori, is operating at capacity and the other, Makara, is filling up. Councillor Fleur Fitzsimons wants a review to look into how the sites are run, as well as to identify alternative locations. Wellington Issues reporter Harry Locke has more.
A place historically just for the dead, but cemeteries are now becoming more and more used by the living. Councillor Fleur Fitzsimons says Wellington's cemeteries are following a global pattern.
There's an increasing trend all over the world that cemeteries are used for recreational purposes, for picnicking, for genealogy, for bird watching.
She says Wellington's cemeteries are now at a critical point. Karori is pretty much full. There are over 85,000 interments within the 35 hectares of land, and burials are now only accepted for the deceased within existing family plots. Further out of the city, Makara is where new burials are taking place, but at current death rates it's expected to be at capacity by 2038. That's closer than it seems. The council says it takes at least a decade to turn land into a functioning cemetery. Fitzsimons says decisions need to be made quickly to prepare the city for future generations.
It is urgent, and we need to think about the long-term budgets of the council, and that means looking to the next 10, 20 and further, and making sure that we're putting away the investment that may be required to invest in more space for cemeteries.
The City Council will vote on whether to carry out a review into cemetery management tomorrow morning. Such a review would look at exploring alternative locations for new cemeteries, as well as looking at options on how to manage the existing ones. One possibility is turning Karori Cemetery into a historic reserve, which would allow it to remain accessible for people using the land recreationally. Open Spaces and Parks manager Mifanwi Emini explains what that would mean for the council.
One of the main things that we would look at would be the council's responsibilities around the graves and the mausoleums and the other assets that are currently actually in private ownership. So if the council is going to take on more responsibility for those and what that would mean for us.
It would mean the council spending more on land upkeep and would have repercussions for the larger structures.
We're in Wellington. We've got risks around earthquakes and other natural disasters, and these are large stone structures, so we would definitely have to take that into consideration.
At Makara Cemetery, for some of the denominations with their own dedicated sites, space is already an issue. In the Pacific Islands section, for example, there's only 50 more plots. The increasing popularity of natural burials means sites are becoming limited there as well. Funeral directors G and Hickton offer natural burials. Their manager Gavin Murphy says their demand has trebled in size over the past 5 years. He says the council needs to consider all the differing burial methods.
It's
burials, not only natural burials, but we're seeing just in our community how diverse that community has become. So we're having obviously a lot more Muslim burials or different religions and cultures that we're needing to look after. So it's important that their needs are met appropriately.
Fleur Fitzsimons says reviewing how the council manages cemeteries will offer solutions and provide answers to some of the pressing questions. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
The New Zealand Breakers today announced a new assistant coach for next season. Chanel Pompallier is not the first woman to join an Australian National Basketball League coaching staff, but she will be one of the few women coaching at New Zealand's top level. Sports reporter Felicity Reid has more.
Chanel Pompallier is an anomaly. Statistics show just under 20% of High Performance Sport New Zealand, or HPSNZ, coaches over the past 5 years have been women. And HPSNZ's own research shows women face significant challenges to even get a look in when it comes to filling coaching vacancies. Unlike many of her peers, Pompallier has been promoted from community coach through the New Zealand Breakers coaching system to work alongside the club's top players.
I've been at the Breakers for the last 5 years. I played a bit during my younger years and sort of got into that coaching role with the junior Breakers and being involved throughout the weeks with a lot of different kids of different ages. But now with being a part of the Breakers and being under Dan and Modi, this is the next step for my development as a coach.
High Performance Sport New Zealand's Sonia Boland says there are many more women like Pompallier ready to step up.
There's no shortage of talented, inspiring female coaches in New Zealand, but there is a failure in the system at the moment to support them to succeed in those roles. And appointments like Chanel's by the Breakers today is really critical to raising the visibility of female coaches, but also challenging the stereotype of what it means to be an elite coach in New Zealand.
HPSNZ invested nearly $3 million into a Women in High Performance Sport program last year, part of which focuses on the development of elite coaches. But Boland says women often face huge barriers.
A lot of women who are either coaching in volunteer roles or in part-time contract positions. And in a lot of cases, these women are trying to hold down professional careers outside of sport. The juggle between how can you devote yourself to pursuing a career in coaching, particularly at the high performance level, but also still trying to sustain a lifestyle and an income is a really significant barrier. The other thing that has come through across the research is the persistence of an old boys club kind of culture within sport, and that's across all sporting areas. And what that really tells us is that it doesn't matter how much we look to try and support women to improve themselves as coaches, unless we start shifting the narrative and start changing how women are viewed and perceived and valued in coaching roles across the system, we're not going to get the increase in numbers that we really need.
Sport New Zealand expects national sports organisations to have gender diversity around the boardroom table, but this mandate has yet to extend to the coaching ranks. Women in Sport Aotearoa co-founder Professor Sarah Lieberman says New Zealand could follow international examples.
Japan, for example, have mandated and to try and achieve that every women's team that is hopefully taking part in the Tokyo Olympics has a woman coach on their staff. So they've taken that approach. We haven't got that in New Zealand yet. It might be something for us to consider.
Lieberman says change will come, but she's calling on a collective approach. And men need to champion women's efforts too. For Checkpoint, Felicity Reid.
And in news just ahead, Air New Zealand has announced it is making further cuts to domestic, Trans-Tasman and Asia services. We'll bring you more details a little later on. A team of researchers at Belgium's University of Ghent are experimenting with lava fat to replace butter in cakes, cookies and waffles. They say the grease from insects is more sustainable than dairy products. Freddie Tennyson reports.
All this cake needs is flour, eggs and 20 grams of dead insects. No, you haven't misheard. A team of scientists at Belgium's University of Ghent are trying to find a way to substitute dairy in cakes, cookies and waffles. They say deriving grease from insects is more green than dairy production.
They are more sustainable because they use less land. They are more efficient converting feed to weight. They also use less water to produce, and in this case they can be produced within Europe. That will decrease the footprint that other type of food sources bring, because they come from far away, let's say South America or Southeast Asia.
By soaking the insects in a little bit of water and then mushing them with a kitchen blender before centrifuges separate a butter-like substance, a grease is made which the team use to bake with. But how does it go down outside of the lab?
For me, there's no difference. So it's actually better. Yeah.
Do you think you would eat insect fat cakes again?
Yeah. Why not?
Why not?
Yeah. I don't think so. No?
The team say that consumers can't taste the difference when a quarter of the milk butter is replaced with the fat from the insects. But they start to notice when it gets to the halfway mark. So who knows? One day you could be munching on a cockroach croissant as you head to the office, or making your nearest and dearest a beetle birthday cake.
And that was Freddie Tennyson reporting. A lot of you getting in contact about coronavirus. This person says surely self-isolation can't be anywhere near as effective as whangapuroa. It is entirely reliant on the person being responsible, and being human, mistakes can arise.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The Health Minister David Clark says it should be known tonight whether the partner of a woman who tested positive for the coronavirus is also infected with the disease. The Auckland woman, the second person in New Zealand to be diagnosed with COVID-19, returned from northern Italy last week before restrictions for returning travellers to isolate themselves took effect. Since then, she then took two domestic flights between Auckland and Palmerston North before testing positive last night. Mr Clark told Checkpoint her partners also suspected to have the virus, but the result of testing is not known yet.
I would expect that they'll be back later this evening. As I say, I have not yet heard back from health officials on that, but I would expect that to be later today.
David Clark. Health officials are tracking down people who sat near the infected woman on her flights from Auckland to Palmerston North and back on Monday. She's in quarantine at home with her husband and her two children, both of whom have been taken out of school. The Health Ministry says it's seeking the passengers who were sitting in her row and the two rows in front and behind. The Union for Airline Crew, Air2, says 13 staff members were potentially in contact with the woman on the flights she took, and none have displayed any symptoms. And two softball officials were also on the woman's return flight to Auckland. Softball NZ says they are showing no symptoms of the virus and have been told by health officials they do not need to isolate themselves. New Zealand won't be upping its travel restrictions for countries with big COVID-19 outbreaks, notwithstanding today's confirmation of a second case. A specially convened group of senior cabinet ministers met at Parliament for the first time this afternoon. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The government's already preparing for more lasting damage to the economy than initially thought, and ministers have now agreed in principle to remove the stand-down period for MSD benefits, as workers and businesses in the forestry industry in particular feel the immediate effects. Other plans are to bring forward local roading projects, as well as facilitate help through IRD and banks. The Prime Minister says ministers are happy with the current border settings, but they're under constant review. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The New Zealand share market appears to have shrugged off fears about the coronavirus. The top 50 index opened about 0.75% lower, but eventually posted a second positive session in a row, closing 71 points, or nearly 0.2% higher. Local financial markets are now convinced the Reserve Bank will follow other central banks and cut its benchmark interest rate at its next review in 3 weeks. Water restrictions have been extended to communities along Northland's east coast whose water supplies are at risk of being contaminated, making it undrinkable. The Regional Council has imposed the restriction to conserve water because there's a risk seawater could get into drying bores, streams, rivers and lakes. Amy Williams has more.
The Council's Water and Waste Manager, Ellie McHugh, says they're closely monitoring coastal aquifers levels and saline content. She says it'll take months of above-average rainfall to raise the levels. Meanwhile, Fire and Emergency is urging people to remember there's a total fire ban across Northland. The Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, is visiting the drought-stricken region tomorrow. This is Amy Williams.
A Tauranga City Council committee has voted by a narrow margin to recommend a rates rise of 12.6%. Councillors voted 6-5 for the increase. Options before them today were for increases of between 5 and 18% as the country's fastest growing city faces a widening gap between paying for infrastructure and staying within its debt to revenue limit. The decision now goes out for public consultation before a final decision in June. It's 4 minutes past 6. Olympic gold medalist Blair Tuke says he and fellow sailor Peter Burling are relishing the prospect of being the team to beat the 49er class come the Tokyo Olympics. The pair are part of a 7-strong sailing group named today as the first New Zealand athletes for the Games. The America's Cup winners are not only defending Olympic 49er champions but also have 6 world titles to their credit and know everyone is keeping a close eye on them.
We probably do have a little bit of a target on our back, but that's something we've had going into Rio. We'd won 27 regattas without slipping up there, so it's something we've I think got used to, and I think we enjoy it. That's why we do sport, to be put under pressure and have to perform when it really matters.
Blair Tuke. Meanwhile, the International Olympic Committee has given further backing to the Tokyo Olympics, urging athletes to prepare full steam despite the coronavirus threat. Amid concerns over possible health risks to spectators and participants, the IOC is unwilling to publicly discuss any other option, such as cancellation or postponement. Liverpool have suffered their second straight loss in English football, beaten 2-0 by Chelsea in the 5th round of the FA Cup. Newcastle United are through to the quarterfinals for the first time since 2006 with a 3-2 win at second-tier West Bromwich Albion. Sheffield United beat Reading 3-2 in extra time. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights. Nick Tipping goes inside out with the Kiwi jazz funk group Space Case. Māori classical musician Ruby Solly shares her thoughts on what shape a future RNZ concert might take if it's to embrace all our musical taonga. And we've got a dreamy sofa session with Christchurch singer David Rea. Join me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Scattered showers, some heavy today with thunderstorms possible about Coromandel and Northland. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Showers today, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and isolated downpours in eastern Waikato, Bay of Plenty and eastern Taupo. Fine weather tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with possible thunderstorms and isolated downpours, easing to showers this evening. Wairatapa, cloudy periods and a few showers. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura coast. Partly cloudy today, remaining showers clearing tonight, mainly fine tomorrow. For the Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, patchy rain clearing tonight, then fine breaks developing. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also Otago and Southland, mainly fine. A shower or two is possible north of Greymouth until early tomorrow. Chatham Islands rain, possibly heavy, easing to a few showers tonight. RNZ National. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government is urging calm as a second case of COVID-19 is confirmed in New Zealand. Public health officials are now racing to track down those who've been in contact with an Auckland mother of 2 who returned from northern Italy last week. With the crisis deepening, ministers have announced more support for individuals and businesses struggling. But is it enough? In the past half hour, Air New Zealand has announced further cuts to domestic, Trans-Tasman and Asia services. Our business editor, Giles Beckford, will join us live in a moment. But first, here's our deputy political editor, Craig McCulloch.
The Health Minister, David Clark, alerting MPs to the latest coronavirus development.
New Zealand now has its second case of COVID-19.
And with it, a new sense of urgency. The woman who is the second confirmed case has mixed with dozens of people since her return from northern Italy. She flew via Singapore last week and on Monday flew from Auckland to Palmerston North and then back. Last night, she tested positive for COVID-19.
I'm advised the individual is not particularly unwell. She is exhibiting mild to moderate symptoms and does not require hospital treatment.
The woman is now in quarantine at home along with her partner and 2 children. The children had been to school at Westlake Boys and Girls, but do not have symptoms. The Prime Minister and Education Minister urging calm.
There's very, 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 very low probability of it having been transmitted at the school.
Very, very low.
Officials are now tracking down those who have been in close contact with the woman, but questions are now being raised about whether enough was done to contain the spread.
My question is to the Minister of Health. Is he confident that the border controls in place for the management of COVID-19 coronavirus are adequate and were put in place at the appropriate time?
Mr. Speaker, yes.
The opposition probing Dr Clark in Parliament. New conditions have been imposed on northern Italy as well as Korea, requiring arriving travellers to quarantine themselves for 14 days. But those restrictions did not kick in till Monday, several days after the patient's return.
New Zealand has consistently been one of the first countries to introduce travel restrictions.
For instance, for the likes of Northern Italy, we sit amongst only, I believe, Samoa, Kiribati, Israel, and I think recently the UK, and having expectations on travellers from Northern Italy.
Those restrictions remain in place with no immediate plans to ramp them up. Senior Cabinet Ministers met in the Beehive this afternoon to discuss their next steps, with pressure growing for them to offer more financial support for those struggling. The opposition wants tax cuts to stimulate the economy. Businesses and banks have called for direct sector support. Today, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson announcing some progress. The 1-week stand-down period for people applying for benefits because of the coronavirus is to go, and work is underway into whether roading projects in the Gisborne region can be brought forward.
We're doing the work now to identify what further fiscal stimulus would be required. I think it's really important we do this in a measured way. We've got to make sure that anything we do actually gets to the people who need it, that actually solves the problem that we've got and is sustainable.
Other options remain on the table if the economic situation worsens, including tax relief. And all against this backdrop, the government warning this second case won't be the last. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Air New Zealand has announced it's making further cuts to domestic Trans-Tasman and Asia services because of the COVID-19 outbreak. For more on this, I'm joined now by our business editor, Giles Beckford. Giles, what is the latest? What is the extent of these cuts?
Essentially, the cuts will last through to the end of June. That tells us that Air New Zealand is expecting that the virus will have a lingering and quite severe impact on services for the first half of the year. For Shanghai, the resumption of services to Shanghai, which have been suspended, is dependent on the lifting of travel restrictions. That's the basic rule there. And when they do resume, then they will be, where are we saying here? 7 services, from 7, they'll have actually a service every other day through to June. The same sort of reductions will occur on Hong Kong. They'll be cutting back on services to Taipei, to Seoul in South Korea, and into Narita in Japan. Singapore, which of course is an important hub for Air New Zealand and picking up passengers. It will also see a reduction in flights, although still reasonably steady there, a reasonable number. And then looking at the Trans-Tasman services, they're saying that there'll be a cut of 4% in capacity. Now, that might be fewer flights, or it might be a case of actually flying planes with fewer seats in them. And then a 2% cut in domestic capacity that will be really on the main routes that have been affected, possibly routes such as Auckland through to Queenstown, perhaps to Rotorua and some of the other holiday destinations which have been hit by the downturn in tourism. So overall, Air New Zealand cutting its cloth to try and meet the circumstances, save money where it can, although I would expect that we will see more promotions from them, as we've seen at the beginning of the week, at the end of last week, cheap seats to try and fill empty planes.
Yeah, how serious do we think this will be for Air New Zealand, given they've already downgraded their profit expectations already, and $11 million is being spent on trying to encourage people to come here, yet we're seeing essentially more cuts?
But they have no choice. They're like every other major airline in the world, which is that people are frightened to fly to certain destinations, that the general demand for air travel is falling away, and in those circumstances they need to be able to cut services, they need to fly fewer times, they need to cut the number of seats available. It does save them a little something in terms of fuel, and from that point of view they'll probably be happy on that, but there's no doubting that the hit on Air New Zealand's full year profit will be significant, and they gave us a taste of what they were expecting a few weeks ago.
And what do we know, if anything, any mention of the staff or the crews? Because if they're not flying as often, what happens to the people that would normally fly those routes, one wonders?
At this stage, there's no comment in the latest release as to what they do. Undoubtedly, they will try and put staff on leave where they can, deploy them to other jobs. It may be that there will be temporary layoffs. We don't quite know how the airline wants to manage this. Of course, crews are positioned around the world, and there may well be some casualties in some of their overseas operations to counter this. But they have no choice. From this point of view, they need to cut where they can. We know that they're freezing senior salaries, that bonuses are probably going to be cut as well. I wouldn't be surprised if the government, as the major shareholder, doesn't quietly acquiesce to a smaller dividend or possibly no dividend at all if the situation were to get that serious.
Thanks, Giles. That's Giles Beckford, our business editor, speaking there about Air New Zealand's announcement that they are cutting back on more routes, and they are even cutting back on the domestic market, and the Tasman capacity is going to be reduced by 4%, domestic capacity reduced by 2% through to the end of June, and this is all down to COVID-19. The World Health Organization says COVID-19 coronavirus is more deadly than the seasonal flu, as the number of cases worldwide rises above 90,000. Iran has temporarily released more than 54,000 prisoners in an effort to combat the spread in its crowded jails. Italy has reported a 50% jump in deaths in the past 24 hours, and the UK has warned a fifth of its workforce could be off sick if the coronavirus takes hold. The BBC's Rich Preston has more on the global situation.
South Korea's president says they are at war with the virus. His country's seen the highest number of cases outside of China, and he apologised for the lack of preparedness in dealing with the outbreak.
I'm very sorry for the inconvenience caused by the insufficient supply of face masks.
73 countries have now confirmed cases of the virus, which has so far resulted in over 3,100 deaths. In China, where the outbreak began, the tables have turned. Chinese cities are now restricting travel to those coming from other destinations which have been badly hit. In Europe, Italy remains the worst hit, with more than 2,000 cases. The British government's introducing measures to control the spread of the disease, saying it's more likely than not that the UK will be significantly affected and that a fifth of workers could be off sick. The number of confirmed infections in France has now surpassed 200. Indoor gatherings of more than 5,000 people have been banned, and the government's announced it will requisition face masks to distribute them amongst health workers and those who really need them, and to prevent essential medical supplies flying off the shelves. Authorities around the world are urging people not to overreact. Prepare, don't panic. In Australia and Japan, supermarkets and pharmacy shelves have been emptied by people afraid of catching the virus or how they'll cope if they have to isolate themselves at home. New cases of COVID-19 are being announced every day, but officials still insist the outbreak can be managed if people take sensible precautions, self-isolate if necessary, and wash your hands.
Rich Preston reporting. And back home, how is the ordinary New Zealander being affected by the threat of coronavirus? Our reporter Katie Doyle and cameraman Nick Munro went to the Auckland suburb of Howick to get a snapshot.
COVID-19 is causing panic throughout the globe. And despite only having minimal cases, New Zealand isn't immune. That's why we're here in the Auckland suburb of Howick to find out how everyday businesses are being affected. The first stop on our journey is the Urban and East Cafe. Business here is still booming, but Bailey says cleanliness is at the front of everyone's mind.
I would say overall we haven't been affected a great amount, but in terms of just as the staff, like our boss sent out memos to everyone about the importance of health and safety and sanitising all the surfaces, and as staff hand sanitising after touching customers' food. But aside from that, everything's running as usual.
It's a similar story at the local Hammer Hardware, where shopkeeper Suresh says customers are spending up large on face masks and sanitizer.
People come and ask for all the sanitizers, cleaning products, masks, basically those sort of things, yeah.
And are you selling out of those?
We sold out most of the masks they required. We have other masks which are a simple one for sanding and other stuff. We sold out on sanitizer, we can't buy anymore. A lot of people buying the home remedy, which is alcohol and water and everything.
Down at the community centre, ESOL teacher Vanessa Lewis says she's noticed some elderly folk haven't been turning up to class.
I'm seeing on a daily basis at the moment people withdrawing. At the very beginning, people were a bit cautious, and then when we got our first case of it over the weekend, there's been an influx of people withdrawing, mostly older people. And some of them, it's because their families are not wanting them to be in a large group.
With the older people that are choosing to withdraw, do you worry that maybe they're becoming isolated? Is this their way of getting out and meeting people?
Exactly, and I had that conversation with my class today, because it becomes a little community. You know, people bring vegetables, they bring seeds, sometimes they go on outings together, and I find it slightly unfair that the families are stopping them from coming because of that very situation. They will be isolated.
Out on the street, people say they aren't panicking about COVID-19.
I'm not quite worried yet because I think there's only been one confirmed case, so I'm not actually as concerned about it, and haven't gone panic shopping yet.
The whole panic around it is doing more damage than the actual virus itself, I think. So people are just going overboard, and then if there's something you can't stop, maybe you just have to let it go and then get on with it.
I am a wee bit worried. I'm more worried for my family, the younger ones. I mean, I've had my day, so, but I don't want to suffer either. But, yeah, I think there should be more restrictions taken.
We've had to be a bit more prepared because we're actually from Australia. So we probably were careful to take out insurances in case that we got locked in New Zealand, not be able to get out, or in Australia coming in this way. And now we're going back over to Perth. So I do have my masks ready for the flight and my antiseptic wipes always.
There has been some panic buying here in Howick. The local countdown is running visibly low on toilet paper and hand soap. There are also gaps on the shelves where bread and sanitary products should be. So for now, it's all business as usual. For Checkpoint in Howick, Katie Doyle.
And if you were listening to that on your radio, you can see the video online. We've had a few texts in about traffic in Wellington this evening. Police say a van towing a trailer has rolled on the Hutt Road or State Highway 2 at Hurakiwi. There don't appear to be any injuries, but motorists are being told to expect delays. It is 22 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Water restrictions have been extended to Northland's east coast communities and a total fire ban remains in place, despite rain sprinkling parts of the region today. Coastal communities have been told to conserve water because there's a risk seawater could contaminate drying bores, streams, rivers and lakes, making the water undrinkable. Agricultural Minister Damien O'Connor is visiting the drought-stricken region tomorrow, where farmers and households are desperate for reprieve. Amy Wilson reports.
Water shortages are starting to hit Northland's coastal communities that rely on natural reserves. The Northland Regional Council has extended water restrictions to more than 20 coastal communities along Northland's eastern shores that draw water from bores, springs, streams, rivers and lakes. The council's water and waste manager, Ali McHugh, says these coastal aquifers are at such low levels they're at risk of being contaminated with seawater.
There could be a salty taste to the water, as generally people's first indications, or it could be that their pumps are behaving not how they normally would. Some pumps wouldn't cope with deposits in them, so it may be that their pumps behaving differently or they're tasting salty water.
Ms McHugh says it'll take months of above-average rainfall to raise the aquifer's levels. She says the longer the drought goes on, the worse the situation will become. Despite the well-documented drought, some people are ignoring a total fire ban in Northland. On Sunday, a scrub fire in Paihia caused a dozen homes to be evacuated. Fire and Emergencies Regional Manager, Ron Devlin, says there have been over 100 avoidable fires since the ban began, some deliberately lit and others started by power tools and lawnmowers used at the hottest time of day.
Don't light fires. They're unnecessary. I can't think of any reason why anybody would need to go out there and light a fire. For the next few weeks, if you want to burn your rubbish, wait till the fire ban is finished. Barbecues on the beach or ground fires and so forth, wait. There's no need for those.
Met Service says an average 5 mils of rain fell in scattered showers in Northland today, with some areas experiencing heavy rainfall. Its meteorologist, Kieran Doolan, says it was a brief reprieve.
Today's probably the last gasp of wet that we'll see for the next few days at least. So there's a front that's been making its way up the North Island today, which has had a bit of thunderstorm activity associated with it, although that's been more concentrated to the southeast of Northland.
Mr Doolan says Met Service is monitoring a low-pressure system moving over the Tasman, but it's too early to say if there's a chance of rain for the region next week. Ron Devlin from the Fire Service has a message for Northland about the rain. It's business as usual.
The risk is not reduced. I reiterate that a few hours of a warm, dry wind and all that dampness is gone.
The drought conditions in Northland were classified as an adverse event for the primary sector last month, unlocking government funding for local farmers and growers. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor will be visiting Northland tomorrow to meet with locals and farming leaders affected by the drought. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
The first official announcement for New Zealand athletes heading to this year's Tokyo Olympics has been made this morning, with 7 sailors the first names on the list. The Kiwi team, which is expected to eventually total more than 200, with the Games now less than 5 months away. As Clay Wilson reports, the rapid rise of a new combination isn't dimming their expectations for medal success.
Most teams need years together to be competitive at the highest level. But NACRA 17 sailors Michel Wilkinson and Erica Dawson have needed just 9 months to earn Olympic selection. Hoping they might get to Tokyo, but knowing the 2024 Paris Games was more realistic, Dawson says the combination immediately clicked.
With such a short timeline, we've really prioritised what we're working on and what was going to make the most difference around the course. So, yeah, we've prioritised really well and we get on really well as a team, and I think those are massive.
Just like their performance at last month's World Champs in Australia, a 7th placing to effectively clip their ticket to Tokyo. Wilkinson says their early chemistry as a combination kick-started their rapid rise.
We're very fortunate that, it was only 6 weeks into sailing together. We got nominated to go to the test event. And it was, at the time, it was like, wow, okay, this is out of nowhere. But now it's amazing. So we've had that experience in Japan, and that was a big deal.
Also named in the first batch of athletes are 49er stars Peter Burling and Blair Tuke, 49er FX duo Alex Maloney and Molly Meach, and laser exponent Sam Meach, who all claimed medals at the 2016 Rio Games. Burling and Tuke also have a Games silver medal and no less than 6 world titles to their names. Tuke says they know everyone is coming for them.
Yeah, I think we probably do have a little bit of a target on our back, but that's something we've had going into Rio. We'd won 27 regattas without slipping up there, so it's something we've, I think, got used to, and I think we enjoy it. That's why we do sport, to be put under pressure and have to perform when it really matters.
Something they've done to great effect for Team New Zealand in the America's Cup. The pair are juggling their Olympic campaign with preparations for the looming defence of the old mug. Tuke admits it's a hectic schedule, but says it's working well.
Us doing 49er sailing helps us to be better sailors for Team New Zealand, and the work we're doing at Team New Zealand really gives us a benefit in the 49er sailing. So as long as you get the time management right and we do enough sailing in the 49er to keep the time in between us and intuition and all that sort of stuff up there, then we're better for it, and seeing that now managed to keep improving and being better as the years go on.
But it's still not a certainty the Kiwi sailors will get the chance to match their Rio success. The coronavirus outbreak is raising questions about whether the Tokyo Games will actually go ahead. But New Zealand Olympic Committee Chief Executive Karen Smith says they aren't expecting any cancellation or postponement.
My sense of it from Tokyo and from the IOC is that they're very firmly fixed on proceeding sensibly. And in that case, we also work in New Zealand with the New Zealand government, with the police, with the health authorities, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who are keeping us informed and connected in terms of the challenges around the world.
The NZOC's biggest current concern around the coronavirus is the disruption or cancellation of qualifying events. New Zealand athletes in up to 8 sports, such as boxing, water polo and archery, are being affected. And Smith admits the qualification parameters for some of those codes remains up in the air.
That's really our focus. It's quite an intense chain of events. And I guess as coronavirus goes into clusters in different parts of the world, therefore there's another consideration. Would it be safe to host an event in that place? So there's layers of considerations there.
For now, though, all is on track for Tokyo. And with his first Olympics on the horizon, Michel Wilkinson has extra reason to hope it all goes ahead without a hitch.
I used to love watching the athletics and the sailing, and being amongst those people that I thought were superheroes is going to be really cool.
New Zealand athletes and teams will continue to be announced over the next 4 months, with the final selections coming just a few weeks before the Games begin. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
And quickly before we go, Sue has got in touch with a delightful story. She says our chocolate lab Bella has a dance which she launches into when the Checkpoint theme music comes on. We are convinced she recognises the music as a trigger for her dinner to arrive. She dances backwards around the kitchen till the food arrives, and if she's out of the kitchen when the music starts, she's there like a speeding bullet. Send us a video. We're back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Air New Zealand is making further cuts to overseas flights to counter the impact of the COVID-19 virus on demand. The Health Minister says there's no need for cases of coronavirus in this country to be automatically put into hospital care, as the evidence shows most people recover without medical intervention. Water restrictions have been extended to communities along Northland's east coast, where water supplies are at risk, and 2 climate protesters who roped themselves to an oil rig in the Taranaki Basin yesterday have been airlifted off this afternoon at the oil company's expense. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Yeah, we're really pleased to see that it's just passed its second reading in Parliament, 81 votes to 39, obviously onwards to the third reading.
Live